Yes.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Sunny Galt, and I am the founder and the network director for Parents on Demand. And we are a network for shows that are focused on parents. So if you're a podcaster out there and you create content for parents, we would love for you to check out our stuff. So here is a quick screen right here. This is actually our website, and you can see to the side there is our app. So you can listen for free on our apps on Apple and Android, and lots of good stuff if you're creating podcasts for parents. I like to say we focus on MAC. So MAC stands for marketing. So we help you market and promote your shows. A stands for advertising. So if you're interested in making some money with your shows, that's always nice. We'll help you out with that. And then C stands for community. And one of the things we love to do to help build community is doing these webinars. So today, I kind of skipped a slide here, but today we are talking about the 7 deadly sins of podcast recording. And I am not doing this by myself. You can see some of the other people that are on the screen here, but we are joining with Audio Editing Solutions as well as Team Podcast to share what we've learned in, editing and recording shows for several years now. So let's go ahead. I'm going to stop the screen share so you can see everybody on screen now. And let's meet some of the other people that are joining us. So John and Christy, let's start with John. John, tell us a little bit about yourself and your business and what you do.
I started podcasting in 2012 because I picked up an iPhone for the first time and I said, what's this thing? It's a podcast app. And because I was so horrible at speaking, I had to learn how to edit. So being a horrible speaker made me a pretty good editor. And I started helping other people, and then it just snowballed into Audio Editing Solutions. Me and my nephew, Justin, we've been doing this, I guess, for 4 years now.
Wow.
And it's a lot of fun. I consider myself a podcaster who helps podcasters, and I also edit.
Okay, very good. All right, and Christy, tell us about Team Podcast and what you do.
Sure. My name is Christy Haussler, and I started podcasting back in about 2011 and created a podcast. And then when I couldn't find the company I wanted to hire to outsource everything about my podcast other than the content creation, that's when I had to create my own company. So that's when I created Team Podcast, and we do full service podcast production. So really anything that would happen after you create the content, from the editing to the show notes to the social media to the graphics to the marketing and that sort of thing, we can help you with. And looking to add on some cool features for Amazon Kindle and other podcast daily briefs from Alexa for things going on in 2018. So trying to offer everything to take all the work off the podcaster's plate.
We like that, right?
Yes.
All right. So let's hop back in here to our screen. So have you guys heard this phrase before, this fix it and post?
Yes.
It always makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. So we hear this a lot, right? So if you're brand new to podcasting, let me kind of explain what this means. Post meaning post-production. So a lot of times when people are recording, you may have an issue or whatever, and someone will say, don't worry about it. We're going to fix it in post. So this is an editor's kind of worst nightmare, right? And that's one of the reasons we decided to do this topic today. If someone says fix it in post, stop and say, no, let's fix it now, because the best quality you can hand over to your editor, even if that's you, that's going to make your show that much better. So yeah, fix it in post is something that, we don't really want to rely on. There are a lot of great tools now, and I'm sure we're going to be sharing some of that as we go along. And editors are really good. John and Christy know what they're doing, right? But you're only as good as the content you give them, right? They can do wonderful things, but they're not necessarily miracle workers, right, guys?
We're not your magician.
We can cut out, I always say audio processing is like makeup. A little bit can enhance the beauty of a recording, but if you have to use too much, too much makeup, it has the adverse effect.
Yeah, it doesn't sound natural. And I think, especially in podcasting, we want to sound as natural as possible. I think that's what draws people to podcasting as opposed to some other mediums. So, yeah, over processing things and, running them through a bunch of filters isn't necessarily the best way to do that. So, try not to just fix it in post. And we're going to talk about some ways that we can correct some common audio issues while recording so you don't have to do that. Let's go ahead and start with our first little bullet point here. Our first deadly sin, if you will, and that is using the wrong equipment or using it incorrectly, right? Because you could have the best equipment in the world, but if you're not using it the right way, we got some problems, right? So let's start with using the right equipment. And our big thing here that we're focused on is the microphone, right? John, I'm going to let you take this one. I know you and I have had some conversations in the past with dynamic versus condenser mics. How would you explain in layman's terms, for people that are doing some mic shopping, which one might work best for them?
Well, I would say if you're a new podcaster, a dynamic mic would work the best. That's what I'm using right now. It's very directional. It doesn't take in a lot of background noise. A condenser microphone kind of picks up everything. A condenser microphone is the Blue Yeti, the Blue Snowball. A dynamic microphone would be a ATR 2100 from Audio-Technica. This is a Shure SM58. The problem is that a lot of times people get a Blue Snow or a Blue Yeti. They'll put it in the middle of the table, and they'll be so far back that it'll pick up all the background noise, everything else around it. And you'll have such, it'll give you such poor audio quality. If you bring it closer, you really have to know how to set up a condenser mic. You need a quiet room. These are very forgiving. And, for a new podcaster, I think that's the best way to go.
Simple.
Yeah. And John, your favorite, what is it? The ATR?
Well, that's the workhorse of the podcasting community. The ATR 2100, it's a dynamic mic. And it can be used as a USB. You can plug it right into your computer. Or if you decide one day you want to get a mixer, it also has the XLR output where you can plug that right into a mixer. So it's very versatile. It has a money back guarantee. So if it ever goes bad, you can send it in. They'll fix it or send you another one. It's a great little mic.
Okay. And Christy, any thoughts on condenser versus dynamic mics? What do you use?
Yeah, I have both. I started out with the Blue Yeti, and like John says, Blue Yeti has a lot of controls on it. There's different settings for the microphone. It can be omnidirectional, and it might be good if you're having a conversation with two people, but if you're really just sitting there talking into it, you really have to turn your gain almost all the way completely down and then get right up on the mic in order to not have the room noise overpower you. I'm currently using my ATR 2100, which is what John recommended. And then I would also like to say this, that a lot of times when people are podcasting, one of the first things they want to do when they feel like they're sort of wanting to step up their game is they feel like more equipment is going to help them. They're going to, really bump up their audio quality, and they're going to get a Heil PR40 or, a Shure, a big SMB, something, whatever mic that is, $400. And they feel like it's going to give them a better sound. And I've seen so many people ruin their sound because those are sort of like broadcast quality microphones. And unless you have a mixer and a sound engineer sitting there making adjustments on how you're sounding and really monitoring what's going on from your microphone into the recording device, it's really going to be hard for you as a novice podcaster to control that. So you don't need a mixer. You don't need a bunch of other layers. If you can just master the basic setup and get that really clean and get all of your, settings to where they're pretty much going to be consistent every single time, that is going to be so much more preferable to trying out new equipment and then suddenly saying, oh, that sounded terrible. I mean, I have people that will get almost like a new mic every month, and then they'll turn around and send it back and be like, that mic was terrible. It's like, well, it wasn't the mic was terrible. It takes a lot more to set it up. They're not all plug and play like an ATR 2100 is.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're compressing it too after that. So it's like, you got to think about the end game. Like, how are your listeners hearing this? It's not just how you're recording it. This is actually, I have a condenser mic.
Yeah.
But I do a lot of voiceover stuff as well. And so I use it for a bunch of different things. Sometimes I find with the dynamic mics, I don't know if compress is the right word, but sometimes I feel like it doesn't quite sound like my voice. And I don't know if I know higher pitches, like condenser mics are pretty good with higher pitch, noises.
And the dynamic mics like the ATR, it does record pretty low. So we're always having to boost audio that comes in most of the time on an ATR, just because it does record so low. But that's also part of the reason why it's so forgiving. Yeah. For the for the novice.
And this is not forgiving at all. I can hear like my kids downstairs.
And you can hear your breath. That's the other thing. People will get those kind of mics, and they're great mics if you know how to use them and you've got the proper technique. But all of a sudden now you're like, I'm breathing really heavy, or all of my lip noises are picked up and they weren't previously. And it's because you changed to a different type of mic.
Sure. All right. So there's tons of information out there about mics. If you just Google mics and podcasting, people have written articles, and I'm sure there's a lot of podcasts on that. So I don't want to dive into that too much, but
more money is not always mean better though. Just remember that.
Right. Good point. What else besides the mic? And you guys, this is kind of neat that we're doing this as a webinar because you can kind of see our setup. So I've got a couple different things here. I've got my pop filter. So this goes, and I think pop filters are really needed, especially with condenser mics. I always hear the P's and the S's and all that kind of stuff. Then I have a shock mount and I have an arm. But what do you guys typically see most podcasters using? What's kind of standard now? Or is everyone kind of doing their own thing? John?
Well, for me, I think that mic technique, if the mic that you have is king, mic technique is queen. And it almost might be interchangeable, because if I always say keep 4 fingers from the microphone and then on a 45-degree angle. So if I say Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers, everything is going past the microphone, but I'm in the range of the microphone so you can still hear me. So you're not getting those plosives that are banging in your ears. It's almost like someone cupping your ears if you're using headphones or something like that. So I think mic technique is paramount. What happens is when you get an ATR 2100, they give you this little plastic thing with 3 little legs on it. And people think, well, that's how you're supposed to put it on a table and that's where you're supposed to use it. By that time, it's 2.5, 3 feet away. And then we have that same problem. So I have an arm. I have an arm that's connected to the desk, but I also have, and I don't have it here right now, but I also have a desk mount that swings, because this down here is a studio for 2 other people. So if I could pan my camera around, you would see that there's 2 other mics here and 2 other stands. So I have a tabletop stand, and I also have this stand here. I like this because I can move around the microphone if I have to get to the mixer, if I have to get to something else. I also have a voice recorder here, or a voice changer here, where I can go to a real deep voice like that. So I have all these controls. So I have to be able to move around. And if I'm moving around, I'm very conscious to be on the axis the mic is on.
Okay.
So I say mic technique is probably the second thing versus what mic you have.
Okay. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Christy, as far as equipment is concerned, what are some supplemental things that you recommend or that you use yourself?
Yeah, I have a lot of people will start out getting a pop filter, and pop filters are not a bad thing at all. But what I have found is that many times the way the pop filter goes on the kind of the shaft of the microphone and then bends around, if you don't have it adjusted right, it puts you a lot further away from the mic than you really should be. So you do want to be careful with that. I find that people that have certain types of accents will have more of a problem with the plosives and the popping P's and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. If you're not one that has those issues, a lot of time a windscreen, like you'll see this little fuzzy thing that goes on the end of the mic, might be all that you need to get away with if you're using, like John said, the proper mic technique when you're at the right distance and also have it on the angle. So much of that is caused by pushing all your air into those into the parts of the microphone, and it just makes bumping noises with those plosives, and those again are really hard to correct in post-production. And not just that, but you have to correct each one individually. So you can talk about hours of post-production that you don't want to pay for, and have someone else have to try to fix them, and even then the fix is not going to be great. So, but I would also say that as far as mix, if you have to get something else like a mixer or some other type of piece of equipment, there's a huge difference between a mixer like, I'm sure John probably has sitting in his studio versus like a Scarlett Focusrite or something like that, where you might just need it to plug in 2 mics into one laptop where you can sit and have a conversation with someone. So I would just say go with the simplest piece of equipment that can accomplish what you want to accomplish, and don't overcomplicate complicate it, because the more layers you get in, the more things you can do. I mean, you really have to be an audiophile to truly appreciate all of the things that a mixer can do for you.
Very good. All right, let's move on to our next deadly sin, and that is recording in a bad location or the wrong location. You see the image we have behind here. Obviously, traffic jams are not a good place to record. But what have you guys seen, as far as, bad locations? Where have people recorded that you're like, are you serious? You tried to do that? Anything come to mind?
I had one client who moved, and their house was, I guess there was a lot of curtains and cushions and stuff in there. And she moved to a bigger room, had a big office, and it was all flat and everything. There was this big reverb echo because the room was so empty. So she's like, what can I do? And I said, go get like those standing clothes racks, get 3 of them and throw like comforters over them. And that made a huge difference. Also, if you can take something and they have these, you can buy them now on Amazon. It's like a half moon thing with foam in it. I've also seen people take pizza boxes and put foam in it and prop it up. So anything to keep the audio from bouncing and coming back in, something to absorb the audio from coming back, will make a big difference also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I was going to say, one of the things that I see a lot of times is people really want to do a lot of mobile podcasting right now. Being on the roving reporter at the conferences and things like that you attend is a great idea to add some variety to your podcast. But if you pick the main exhibitor floor of the conference and decide to try to record right there while you are, surrounded by people talking, it becomes really difficult. Then the other thing that happens is, because you and your interviewee are having a hard time hearing each other, you end up talking way louder than you need to, and all of that's being recorded. So you end up with just completely blown out audio that it really is a hard time to salvage, that sort of thing. I also see a lot of people are very, very paranoid when they live in a big city. Like, if people are recording in New York City, there's going to be a certain amount of ambulances. There's going to be a certain amount of fire engines, or even construction. A truck pulls up for delivery and backs up or something like that. There's going to be those beeps. And you don't have to eliminate everything, but it's just a matter of recognizing that there's a distraction or a disturbance, let it pass, and then continuing where the conversation is, because all of that can be taken out if you just stop and let it go by.
And sometimes it actually makes sense just to leave it in. I've had that happen too, where it's kind of funny, that it's happening. There's a gardener outside or whatever, a dog is barking. And, sometimes you're just in the flow of conversation and your audience gets it, and
it depends. It completely depends on the show. Like, I've had people that are like, oh, they're on retreat at an ashram in Bali or whatever. And that person's sitting out and you hear birds chirping around or whatever. Well, you know what? A lot of people pay good money to get that stuff added to their audios to make it sound authentic. So leave it in. You don't need it to be. I mean, people are not expecting studio quality podcast recording every single time you record. And so if there are things that sort of add to, maybe there's a chicken out there that wants to crow every so often, let it do its thing. And that just adds to the uniqueness of your show.
Yeah.
Well, I have a fire department that's 100 yards from me. So it could happen today.
Wow. Yeah.
But I do have a mute button on mine. So if I'm not talking, I will mute.
That's a good point too. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you have a microphone that has a mute button, I know a lot of people like to do that. Or sometimes if you're recording online, sometimes there's an easy way to mute yourself as well. And that's really nice if you've got multiple people that you're recording with.
Sure.
All right. So closets, I think maybe we mentioned that, but closets, especially on the go, if you are in one of those hotel rooms or something like that, usually the carpeted areas, if you can get to a carpeted place, anything with clothing or something that's going to absorb that noise, that's always my favorite go-to.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, let's talk about internet speed. So I think this is primarily more important for people that are using, recording online through like a Zencastr or Cast or one of those systems out there. But what have you guys noticed with slow internet speeds and how that impacts the recording?
It is, if it is the third most deadliest sin for me, because my thing is, you should be able to plug in. If you can plug in, please plug in. If not, get as close to the router as you can. And also, please if your children are out playing, down streaming Netflix and someone's playing a game and all that other stuff, it's going to drag all that bandwidth down, and then you're going to have problems with your recording. So take all that into consideration, get everybody off of everything, give yourself the maximum bandwidth, try to get closer. But for me, you have to plug in.
Now,
That's what I feel.
John, I know that you have worked on a couple shows, still work on them, where, connections, are an issue. Talk to us a little bit about recording locally and how that can work, because I know we've even had some of the members on our network struggle with this. So what do you recommend with people that are in remote areas? You're going to record with them on a regular basis, and it is just not working out to record through the internet.
I record the She Podcast, which is Elsie Escobar, Jessica Kupperman, and I'm here. Jessica's in Delaware. Elsie's in North Carolina,
Yeah.
somewhere. And Elsie seems to be the problem because they have no internet out there. She uses a hotspot. We cannot use internet to record. So what we do is we use Skype so we can hear each other. And then we do a triple ender. We all record our own audio. And what happens is I just go, whatever we're going to record on, whether it's QuickTime or Audacity or something like that, we get it set up and I go, okay, 3, 2, 1, press record. So it's close.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll take my headphones off and I'll put them over the microphone and I'll say, Elsie, clap. And when she claps, it's on her track and it puts a spike on my track. And the same thing with Jessica. Now, once I have that, I can line those spikes up. And as long as we don't stop recording, everything is synced up and it sounds like we're in the same room. A lot of times we can't hear Elsie. She's doing that whole, what I call Skype voice. Yeah, that whole
latency.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And we can't hear her, but we just let her go because we figure she's going to come in sooner or later. And the other thing is, it's a podcast. Nobody else is listening. So if you're having a problem, you stop until things clear up, and then you continue again. It's not a show where you can't have dead air. You can. So you can even talk. I always say to my clients, if you're having an issue, talk to me when you're recording. Talk to me. Say, John, I want you to do this, or John, let's take that out, or John, let me do that again. And you can talk to your editor. And that helps. But that has been right now. It took us a long time to trying to get that workflow where we could still sound good. But if you have a co-host, I think you should always be doing a double ending recording like that. It gives you the best audio quality.
Yeah. Christy, any other advice?
I was going to say the beauty of so many podcasters recording or doing interviews with other podcasters as the guest is that it never hurts for you guys both to be recording on both of your ends. And that way those tracks could easily be sent to an editor. I even have, I have certain clients that will always record themselves in Audacity, even though they might have Skype and Ecamm or Zencaster or something else going on at the same time, because they know that no matter what happens, their audio is going to sound really good. And I think that's part of credibility for them as a podcaster too, is to make sure, my sound's going to be good. The guests might not be something they can completely control. So they want to try to make it sound as good as possible, but don't ever be afraid to get somebody to make a change with their equipment or their setup in order. If you hear it on your end, the audio is going to come out that way. So don't ignore those elephants in the room where you feel like, I'm hearing something. I'm not really sure what it is. Sometimes it might be they're sitting in a squeaky office chair. Sometimes it might be somebody that can't leave a pen alone and they got to click and flip and do all these kind of crazy things, or they've got a fidget spinner or whatever. If you hear it, it's going to come out in your recording.
They'll fix it in post.
Yeah. I got all of those.
One thing that I've noticed a lot of people doing, and actually I'm about to start doing it too. So, I can't say those people because I'm kind of included in this, but so when you record, wanting to make the most of your recording so it goes out in multiple places. So one of the things that I'm actually testing next week is recording through Zoom, doing a Facebook Live, but kind of doing it so I tell everyone, hey, we're recording, podcast episode. This is a behind the scenes. I won't include all that in the actual episode. But we're talking about using more bandwidth because we're talking about video and things like that. Have you guys seen that causing more of an issue? People trying to multitask and trying to do multiple things where their bandwidth just can't take it because they're doing video and audio and trying to do something live. Have you guys run into that yet?
It actually happened to me. My router went bad where the cable went in. So I still had wireless. So my computer would still connect wirelessly, but I thought I was connected through the Ethernet cable. So my two co-hosts would come down here and they would get their two laptops up. So we had three laptops that were going on the wireless. So whenever we moved something or something happened, it would drag that down and everybody on Facebook would say, hey, your Facebook video is going out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't understand why. And I was recording a show for somebody else. And all of a sudden something happened to my phone and I heard the recording dip. And I'm like, that shouldn't happen. So I unplugged the phone. I unplugged the connection from the Ethernet the Ethernet connector from the back of my computer, and I still had the internet. It didn't make a difference. So then I had to go get a new router. So yes, if you're going to use all that bandwidth, and you're going to find out whether your processor can handle it too, your computer processor, because you're going to be doing Zoom and Facebook and recording. So test it.
Test it.
But just remember, all internet is not created equal. And I know John and I probably test it more than anyone else when we're uploading large files and you hit upload on a 35 megabyte file and it says it's going to take 3 hours and 15 minutes. And you're thinking, what am I at my grandmother's house? This is terrible internet. But everyone else that's just surfing says, oh yeah, the internet's fine.
Yeah.
It's very different processes that are, taxing it whenever you're uploading big files. So if you are consistently having problems with your internet, call your internet provider and say, what plan am I on? Is there something that would give me more bandwidth and a more stable connection or faster upload speeds or download speeds? Because that's the other thing. When you go to either upload or download your files for yourself to edit or for an editor to edit, you're going to be occupying all that time trying to keep those downloads going if you don't have really good internet. So call your internet provider and ask them what plan you're on. If you're on the very lowest plan, sometimes for just 10 to 15 bucks more a month, you can get upgraded to a much better one.
And what would you guys say? What are the magic numbers that we're looking for? And this kind of leads into the next bullet point of being able to test your speed. So one of the websites that I recommend a lot is speedtest.net. And that'll give you're looking for upload, correct? Like when we're recording, we're looking for what the upload speed is, not the download speed, correct?
Not necessarily upload, because that won't come into play until you're actually uploading a file, but the upload speeds are always going to be less than the download speeds. So for example, I have Xfinity where I live. I'm supposed to have guaranteed 250 megabytes per second speed for, surfing and that sort of thing. So I can do a speed test and it'll just roar on the download part of it where it's 200 and something megabytes per second. And then the upload speeds, even on mine where that's 250 guaranteed, my upload speeds are only going to be about 24 to 25. So it's very much a significant difference, but all of those things that you're doing are taking away from your bandwidth that you have. And so if you can find out what plan you're on, most of us don't think about that, or we have had internet for so long at our houses now, they didn't have all these varying speeds and they didn't have it segmented like they were, whenever we had it installed. So call them and see if you're on the best plan for what you're doing, since your situation has changed now that you're a podcaster.
If you're just doing audio, is there a magic number or kind of a range you guys look for to make sure someone has, because I know I would have to vet people, the nature of the podcast that I do is that we have a lot of parents join us, parents that have never touched a microphone or anything like that. They participate in our conversations. And I would have to say to them, okay, go to this website and I need your speed to be XYZ. If you're just doing audio, have you guys found a sweet spot as far as a number is concerned so that people can be like, okay, you at least have that. Okay, then we can record.
I like 25 download and 4 upload is kind of the minimum that I'll go. Okay. I have Verizon Fios, so I have 100 up and 100 down. So I'm very spoiled. I used to have Xfinity like Christy did, and it was 200 up and 12 down, and it was like rocketing to Philadelphia and then coming back on horse. So I just, then I got this in 100, and I really don't have any problems. So
100 upload, that's amazing.
And 100 down too. So yeah, it's yes, I have no problem with it. So I am blessed, and I'm internet blessed, but a lot of people don't have that.
and some people are in those Google areas where you have Google Fiber, and man, you're really spoiled when you have that. But the one thing I would say is if you're getting at least, John said 25, let that be the bare minimum. If you dip much below that, your internet is so slow. Even if you stay connected, you're going to have some latency issues, and it's just going to be really hard to fix and make it sound normal in post-production.
I think the sweet spot is 50 down.
I like 50. Yeah.
And then if, anything over 12 is, 12 upload would be great, but the upload speeds are hard to get. They're very hard to get, but 50 down and anywhere between 4 and 12 up is kind of a sweet spot for me. I think you'll be okay with that.
All right. Let's talk about our next deadly sin, and that is going to be wacky volume levels, either way too low, way too high. We need that sweet spot, right? So how do we even test for volume levels? Like for someone that isn't, I know we could get into a whole big conversation about all of this, but in layman's terms, like, because most people are going to probably be recording themselves. Most people aren't going to have someone to come in and help them record. So what are we looking for here, Christy?
It depends on obviously what setup you're using. I will tell you that if you as a podcaster are not plugging in your earphones to the microphone or in some way so you can actually hear yourself in your headphones, you may not have any idea how you sound. You might not realize if you're overmodulated or if you're really, really quiet. So that's the first thing, is make sure you're actually, using the headphones and hearing your voice and the person who you're interviewing's voice. The other part is, I always say, if you're on any sort of a software that gives you a meter or a level, they're going to generally have a green section, a yellow section, and then a red section. You might peek out if you say certain words with like plosives or whatever. You might peek out a few times in the red, but ideally you want to keep it in that upper green and the yellow part for your normal conversation. And a lot of times you also have to pay attention when you get in the moment with your interview. And you know how it is, you get on those interviews and it's like a runner's high when you get off it because it's such a stimulating conversation. But if you move away from the microphone or you change positions, it completely changes your volume. And so it's really difficult for us without, unless you just ride the volume the whole time you're editing, it's very difficult to make it sound all completely normal, because we can't generally accommodate for proximity to the microphone whenever we edit.
I would say that mic technique again would save you in a lot of those situations. Definitely have to have your headphones on. If you're not recording with your headphones on, then how do you even know how you sound? And a lot of times you can see, again, I'm not 100% sure on what you use if you're going to record from the internet with one of the, like Pamela or the voice recorders you would get for Skype or something like that. I don't know if you can see that, but usually they'll give you something, 3 dots, or, even in Google Hangouts, you get a little volume meter there that you can use and try to keep that in the middle. It's better to be a little bit low than too high. We can fix low. Too high, it cuts off the tops of the wave and it gives you distortion, and it's very hard to get that out.
And I will say, for people that use Ecamm call recorder along with Skype, a lot of Mac users use that. Their new update has allowed you now, every time you go to record, there's a little small square dashboard that pops up with the little levels, and it'll say like input and output or mic and speaker. And you can see your voice on the top line and you can see your guest voice on the bottom line. With their latest update, you can now grab that little volume for the guest and either raise it or lower it for your recording. And you used to not be able to have that kind of control over it. So if you feel like your guest is a little bit low, make that adjustment. Don't overdo it, but just make that adjustment. And, ideally, if you can come out in a situation where your volume is very closely whatever the levels are, if you can closely match it with your guest, you're going to have a better recording and on the final part of it anyway, after it's gone through post-production, because there's less, even if it records low and you have to do a lot, the less we have to do with it to naturally make it sound good, the better.
Okay. Yeah. Because I know I've used, what have I used? Zencaster and Cast. And I think with both of those, I don't think you have the ability to adjust it at all. And I'm always thinking, okay, how can I tell them? I usually tell them, okay, go into your settings. I'm like, do you have a Mac? Do you have a PC? Go into your settings. Like,
it's hard. It's hard. But I will also tell you, if you hear somebody coming in really loud, just ask them to back off their mic just a little bit. Or if you feel like they're too far away or there's a lot of room noise, tell them they're coming a little soft. Can you either speak up or get a little closer to the microphone? So those are easy adjustments that you can remind someone. And then as you're going along in the recording, if they start trailing off again and maybe they're putting their head down and doing whatever and their volume does that, just say, okay, hang on, you're trailing off again. Can I get you to repeat that? And if you do that so many times, they're going to eventually remember, oh, I got to sit up and stay up on top of this mic.
Right. Right. One thing I forgot to mention earlier in the webinar is you guys may have questions as we're going along here. There is a Q&A section. I know some of you guys that know Zoom a little bit more may be raising your hands. If you can type your question into the Q&A, that's probably going to be the better way to kind of join in on this. And then we'll kind of answer some of the questions as we go. I'll keep checking it. John, anything else that you want to add about volume levels?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything there. Okay. The thing is, I would just say, there's also practice. Practice if you have a new piece of equipment, if you get a new recorder, practice. And then to know your equipment well, that would work. I think that's a big help.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to our fifth deadly sin. We're talking about common speaking mistakes. And this is, speaking of practice, practice makes perfect, right? And that actually kind of leads into our next slide as well. Let's focus in on some things that can be overcome, because some of this is just early jitters. And, I think Christy mentioned this earlier. You kind of got that high when you're interviewing someone and things may not come out exactly the way you want. What are some of the things that you guys see that are common speech issues or speaking issues that could be easily overcome?
Well, the crutch words. And then the other thing is, I don't mind an but when you into a word, they're hard to get out. And if you know into a word, some people cannot start a sentence without a like something like that. It's very hard to do.
You add the uhs to and
stuff like that. We can usually get them, but if you're talking into a word like that, they're very hard to take out, almost impossible. And for me, I would rather leave that in than have someone hear an edit point.
Hear about it.
Because if it's more natural to hear someone go, but I would rather do this than to hear like a pop or something. Your ear will pick that up more than it will just leaving that in there. So the other thing is breathing. Now I have a problem. I'm a mouth breather from way back. So I have a hard time, and I'm always trying to learn how to breathe through my nose. And then sometimes if I'm talking for a long time, I almost get lightheaded because I need to get that air in. Yeah. So turning your head and taking a breath or something like that sometimes helps. But, if you're sitting there and you're going, constantly. And for me, when I'm listening to a podcast, if I hear someone doing that all the time, it's almost like someone sticking a needle in my ear as they go on through that. Right. Some people don't mind them. For me, it's a deal breaker.
Yeah. What do you guys do when you get something, a file where people are doing a lot of ums and ahs? Sometimes saying that is natural, right? Sometimes we'll say that just in the course of our conversation. Do you guys... do you have the philosophy that you edit most of those out, or do you kind of just listen to see what sounds conversational and edit out the ones that would start to annoy people? Or how do you typically approach that, Christy?
If it's completely sitting out there, like you ask somebody a question and their first thing is,
yeah,
there's no reason to leave that in. There's just absolutely no reason. The other ones, it does become up to discretion sometimes, but for me, if I find it distracting, I'm going to remove it. And the ums are part of that, whether it's, there are times whenever people are truly contemplating an answer and it might need to be left in. But there are other things that really they can be distracting in so many ways. Like the lip smacks. I don't know why people do this, but it's like they get nervous whenever they're recording and they don't even realize it's like they're sucking their teeth right before. And so every answer, it makes a really thin, very much a spike right before they start. And every answer many times will have that. Well, that's really annoying to people that hear that, so we have to remove those sorts of things. My guideline is just always if it's distracting. So even if a client that we have might record an interview and every time their guest answers a question, their first thing out of their mouth is, I love that. Well, they might say that on the 12 times they ask a question, but we're going to try to at least take out some of them so it doesn't look like that's their only response. So, I mean, we want to make them look smarter, more put together than they felt like they were during the interview. But if it's distracting, it's got to come out.
Yeah, come on. Not every question is a fantastic question.
Yeah, exactly. Or that's a good question where they're just buying time to try to answer it. So, yeah, I think a lot of those crutch words, fillers, even, one of the things that I will also say, and I don't know that I've ever really said this before to anyone, I hear a lot of interviewers have a real problem knowing how to properly close an interview. And it ends up being this kind of sometimes a really awkward, I don't know, John, you probably hear it too. It's like, it's just becomes an awkward thing where they're like, okay, well, all right. Well, I hope to see you again. Well, I didn't see you this time. I hope to, you know what I mean? You don't really know how to end it with them. So if you think about it ahead of time and say, so-and-so, I'm so glad. Thank you for coming on the podcast today to sharing X, Y, and Z with us. And then, kind of move from talking and closing out with that guest to now, okay, let's close out with your audience. For those of you listening, if you'll go to our website, you can find show notes, whatever your calls to action are. But it's painful to listen to sometimes because it becomes so awkward for the ending of the interview.
You're almost rooting for them to get through it.
Yes. You're trying to find a place where you can cut it off and make it look like it went really well, but it takes a sharp nosedive at the end because we've prepared for everything in the interview except for that. And we don't know how to end it in a way that sounds confident, in a way that sounds succinct. And so it drags out into well, this was awesome. Well, yeah, I think it was great too. Well, that was wonderful. Well, thank you for coming. Well, thank you for letting me. Well, it's bad.
Thank you for thanking me.
Exactly. Thank you for letting me thank you. And the airtime to thank you. So you know what I'm saying though, John, you hear it too, don't you?
Right. My other thing that puts the hair up in the back of my neck is when you're an interviewer and you ask a question, zip it.
Yes.
Yes. Right. Oh, no one needs to hear that. It's if you have an editor, he's taking it. If he's smart, he's taking it out anyhow. Although I did have one guy.
If it's not a split track,
that's true. You can't get it out. Right. You can't get it out. But I did have one guy who said, "You're taking out all my." Oh, yeah. I'm like, yeah, because it's horrible.
Reason, yeah.
He's like, I do that on purpose. I'm like, stop it. Stop doing that.
Exactly. And I will tell you, I have a client that does a really good job of preparing the guest on the front end where they say, when I ask your question, you're not going to hear from me again. And it doesn't mean that I don't think your answer is good. It doesn't mean that I don't agree with you. I'm just trying not to create a distraction. So whenever you're done with the answer, you can just stop. And then whenever I hear that you're done, I'll pick back up. But don't feel like you've got to keep talking if you're waiting for me to interrupt you. And it has made her interviews a lot cleaner because she's not doing the verbal responses all the time, which are extremely distracting, kind of like dogs barking and sort of thing. But it is if you can prepare someone for that, and just to say, you're not going to hear me whenever you answer your question, so just understand that I'm agreeing with you. I'm here to support you, and I'll come back in once your answer's done.
What about scripting? What do you guys recommend to clients of yours when it comes to scripting? Because I think scripting can actually solve some of the stuff we're talking about now, but it can create other problems. So what's your thought on that? John, why don't you start?
I don't script anything that I do because it sounds read and it sounds canned and I don't like it. What I do is I make bullet points where I want to go because I have a tendency to just meander off into some other kind of tangent. And then I'm like, what am I talking about here? And then I have to bring myself back in again. So I love bullet points. Bullet points are what I'm going to do. and I like to have them in front of me as I start to speak. You can have a conversation. You can go on a tangent. That's not a problem. But what happens is one time when you're in tangent land, you have to look over to find out how to make that transition to get back into the subject matter.
Yeah. What do you think, Christy?
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like not everyone can be trusted with a script. It takes a very, very special person, and Sonny, you know this better than I do, but like news anchor quality people that, can actually say what's on the script without making it sound scripted.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you script your questions and your answers and you're not comfortable with talking extemporaneously, do things to help improve that, because it will ultimately improve your podcast. People want to feel like that there's room in a podcast to dive deeper into a question or something, or they want to feel like you're not reading a prepared speech, but they want to feel like you're talking to them. I mean, if I met you somewhere and I said, "Hello, Sonny. My name is Christy Haussler, and I work with Team Podcast, and I'm from Key West, and I'm from this." It would be so. If I had the script, I was going to have this conversation with you over. It would not seem nearly as authentic as me just talking to you and asking the questions. So try to stay away from the scripts. Bullet points are great. If you're going to be feeling like you need to script yourself because you don't trust yourself, practice it enough that it's very natural. And that takes a lot of work. If you need help with those kind of things, Toastmasters groups in your area would be a great place to start to join, to learn how to speak extemporaneously based on your bullet points. And then you can trust yourself and your editor, or you edit it yourself to kind of rein yourself in and not be so, scripted.
All right. That kind of leads us into the next step, which is practicing, because the more we practice, whatever we're going to do, whether it is exactly how we're going to record, if it's our script or whatever, the more comfortable we're going to be with everything in theory, right? And the more smoothly things are going to run. So, John, what tips do you have on practicing?
So for me, it's more equipment. If whatever you're going to use, practice and, record and listen back to it and then tweak it. If it sounds good to you, it's going to sound good to your listeners. The worst thing is to grab a brand new, I have this amazing interview, and I'm going to go out and this person I've always wanted to interview. And I just went out and I bought a brand new recorder and 2 brand new microphones. And I'm going to go out there and I take the cellophane off, and I have no idea how to use this thing. And I go and I record, and I come back and I take the card out and I put it in my computer, and there's nothing there. And I'm like, what? And then what do I do? I say, you call them up and see if you can do it again, because you didn't practice. So practice with your kids, practice with your neighbor, bring somebody over and have coffee, put on the headphones, listen to it, practice. And then when you get good with your equipment, then you can go out and do an interview with somebody. But you should know that equipment backwards and forwards. I think that if you're going to go out and do an interview like that, and to me, if I didn't have anything, I would just take my iPhone and I would use the voice memo, and I would just use this as a microphone and move it back and forth and talk to them and have an interview that way. You'll get better audio quality from that than trying to set up a brand new piece of equipment that you know nothing about.
Yeah.
And then you get it back and you have garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just want to jump off a bridge.
Right.
But something like that, yes.
Yeah, Christy, any other thoughts when it comes
Sure.
to practicing?
I'm just going to do a quick demo here and show you. One of the most important things I think you can do as a podcaster is to train your ear to be a troubleshooter for your guest audio. So I sound probably pretty good right now, but many people don't realize that many times when they start talking, they have got their mic plugged in and they've got green meters everywhere. They've got waveforms on their recording, but they are recording in their built-in mic. And you can hear, now I made a change from my regular external mic to my built-in computer mic and back to the mic again. While I was saying that, I could not hear any difference in what I'm hearing in my headphones because I'm running it through my monitor and that sort of thing. But you heard a difference, right?
Yeah.
You hear the difference in that it's proximity to the microphone. If you have somebody that you feel like there's a lot of room noise, or every time they touch their desk or they write with a piece of, on a piece of paper, or anything happens, you're hearing it, that should be a good clue to you that their mic is not if they're using an external mic, it's not the one that's selected as your preferences. So pick up that, practice hearing that, make a recording with your built-in mic where you hear all that room. You can clearly hear a huge difference. And I hear it the minute someone comes on with a new recording. I'm like, oh, their mic wasn't selected. There's nothing I can do to change and make those two pieces sound exactly the same after that. So please make sure that you are discerning when it comes to that. The other thing is, I would also say, even with equipment, you don't have to know everything about every piece of equipment, but have minimum standards that you make your guests use. Please don't let your guest use their built-in computer microphone. If nothing else, at least force them to go get their smartphone earbuds and plug them in, and you use the kind with the inline microphone here. That will make a much better recording than for you to have a recording where somebody's got to listen to it like this the whole time. I mean, there's a huge difference, and it's not going to be pleasing to your audience because they're going to compare it to everything else that's out there, which sounds like this.
Yeah, I heard something once where, regarding audio versus video, that people will put up with crappy video basically, but the moment you give them crappy audio, they're out.
They can't do it. And the more we hear good audio, the less tolerant we are to bad audio.
Yeah, that's
and so if you're trying to compete with the big shows out there that are trying to capture your audience, they're definitely not going to be using their built-in internal computer mics to record.
Yeah.
So insist on, they don't have to have an external mic, but always make sure your mic preferences are set right and that you have got them not using their internal mic, because there's nothing that will ruin an interview faster than that.
Yeah.
And don't kid yourself. Content does not beat audio quality.
Mm-mm.
I mean, if you have fantastic content and your audio quality is horrible, people will click off just as fast if you have horrible content and very good audio quality. So it goes hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would say too, talking about prepping and stuff, they have those checklists out there. You guys recommend your clients do the checklist, the production checklist. Have you done this?
I have a client that is so meticulous about it. I mean, it doesn't matter if somebody, and he asked him, is this your first podcast you've ever been on there? No, I've been on 32. Not a problem. Let me just go through my checklist. Can you make sure your phone is on airplane mode? Can you make sure that there's no fans or whatever on your computer? Can you go ahead and turn your Skype on Do Not Disturb? Goes through the entire thing. It takes about 4 minutes by the time he's all said and done, by the time they troubleshoot, but it is safety every time that he's going to have a good recording and he's going to be proud to put his name on it.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the phones and I was like, oh, we didn't mention that. That's probably the biggest thing that happens.
Vibrate is not the answer, because you still, and the other part is even vibrations or, turning it on silent. If people are still seeing it with text messages there, they get distracted. And then what do they start doing? They start stammering through their answers.
Yeah.
Right. So just tell them to put it on airplane mode, get it off the desk. Nothing worse than hearing it vibrate, nothing worse than hearing all those notifications on someone's computer. Tell them to put their computer on Do Not Disturb, turn off all their notifications. And I was going to say, I'll be glad to provide a good checklist if you have anyone that wants to do that, to basically make sure you're just addressing it before it comes up. Even things like telling somebody, do you need to go ahead and get a drink of water now? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Anything else you need to do, like now's your time. And then once it's on, we're on. So,
yeah. John, wasn't there something that you had happen? I don't know if it was Dropbox or Google Drive. You have something that automatically downloads files or something like that was messing with your computer.
Yes, I have a Dropbox. Okay. And a client would drop in like 15 files while I was recording with a guest, and all of a sudden everything would start dropping, and I had no idea why. So that is one of my checklists is whenever, like right now, Dropbox is paused.
Yeah.
My phone is in airplane mode. I have the same checklist. Yeah. One of my big things is someone sent me, it's actually a graphic of a big red button. It says, push the button, stupid, because I always would forget to push the record button. And then I would be 15 minutes into an interview and I would look down. I did that today with She Podcast. We were recording today. I said, you ladies ready to go? And they said, yeah. We went through the whole opening and I said, hey, is anybody recording right now? And they both looked and they started cracking up because we forgot to push the record button. So to stop, go back and do it again. And they're at 182 episodes. And we still forgot to press the record button.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I have this whole kind of thing that I go through. Obviously, checklist on my part too, but with guests, because again, the format of my shows always have lots of different guests. So I may have an episode that has 5 different guests on it, and I always like to walk them through it because I'm usually recording through the internet, and I'm like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what you're looking at here on your screen. If you need to mute yourself, here's what you do. If you get disconnected, here's what's going to happen. I basically have a checklist for them too, because inevitably stuff is going to happen. Maybe not that time I'm recording, but the next time I'm recording or whatever. And I find the more you prep your guests, the more comfortable they're going to feel. And then just the better that they're going to handle it when or if things don't go absolutely perfectly, with your recording. So That's one thing that I would add. All right, let's see. Our next one, our last deadly sin. We're on our last one here. Sometimes, we all, we don't want to, especially if you've done a lot of prep for a show, the last thing you want to do is just scrap it or say, this isn't working. But sometimes you just have to let things go. Would you guys agree?
Yes.
Yes.
We'd much rather edit a file that was rescheduled at a better time whenever all the other issues weren't going on than to try to put it together. And I mean, John, probably the same way as I am. Sometimes I get a episode from a client and it'll be, well, there's 2 tracks for each, a track for each person, but we got disconnected 5 times. So now there's 10 tracks, for each one of the 2 tracks for each one of those times that they get disconnected. And you just want to say, either have a backup that you can switch to. If you're trying to record on Skype and Ecamm and it's not working, would Zencaster or would some other way work, that you could have as a backup. But don't keep doing the same thing that's not working, because it's probably not going to get you the results that you want anyway.
Right. And usually if you're disconnecting 5 times and somebody's internet is not
bad,
which is going to give you a lot of different Skypey auto tunes and all that other good stuff. So sometimes you have to stop and troubleshoot. And if you hear something, and just stop, make a little note where you were, stop, troubleshoot it if you can, and then either start back up or, try to fix it at another time and come back and pick up the interview at another time if you can. It's tough, but it's better to do that than to just soldier through and have a lot of horrible audio.
I think I've heard a few times whenever I've had people that had guests on their show, and clearly the guest was not either in the place where there was the right frame of mind. Like if you're trying to record and that guest is at Starbucks in the coffee shop, it's probably not going to work. By that same token, if they're, if they continue to get interrupted at their desk, or maybe even they're trying to walk around and they're trying to, maybe they're out on a walk. It doesn't matter what it is, but if they're not in a place where it's going to be, them sitting down and spending quality time with you for that, it might be better, instead of saying, well, this is the only time they can do it. They said I could do it now. I just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Have some it's your show and everything that goes out has your name on it. So it's okay to say, it seems like this might not be the time you can focus on this right now. Is there a better time we can reschedule? Because I want you to be able to give my audience your undivided attention.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And, people will respect you for holding the bar on that.
I had a situation where I think there were 4 people that were scheduled to be part of a call. So it was myself, and I was acting as the producer. There was the host, and then there were 2 guests, 2 experts. And these were people that we've been trying to schedule them for months. It was like one of those things where the episode was scheduled and then they're doctors, right? So then something happens with their schedule and they can't make it. This thing got rescheduled like 3 times, but finally, and these are like people that have written books and whatever. So, we wanted to have them on the show. And so finally we sit down to do this interview, and everyone's audio is great except for one of the guests. And we can't figure out why. I am troubleshooting everything. I think he maybe even had his own podcast. So like he was used to doing this kind of stuff. Like all the ducks were in a row, right? We should have been able, to do this really easily. And it just wasn't working out. And we started recording. I'm like, the whole time I'm like, can I make this work? Can I make this work? Can I make this work? And I'm like, I can't think of a single filter to put on this guy. It was kind of digitizing and doing some weird stuff. So long story short is I went against my better judgment. We finished the recording, but I did say to them, I'm like, I have to be honest. This is not the best audio. I'm a little bit nervous, but let me go and see what I can do. And I don't know, John, I probably sent the file to you going, what do I do with this? I don't know what to do. I ended up releasing it. I knew I shouldn't have, but I was like, I'm never going to get these guys to come back on my show. I ended up releasing it, and my audience contacted me and said, what are you doing? This is not up to your quality.
I do remember that show. I do remember that episode because we talked about it.
To myself, I knew I shouldn't have released it, and I did it anyway. And
go with your gut for sure. Yeah, if you're nervous about it, there's a reason. And the other part is sometimes a simple reschedule will take all the nerves right out of it, and you'll know it's a better call, it's a better interview.
Yes.
But yeah, when you have that gut feeling, it's there for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And the guy was more than willing. I mean, it took a lot of work and I had to kind of maneuver things, but he was more than willing to come back on. I didn't have to redo the whole thing. I just needed to know his sound bites and what he said. And he totally re-recorded with me, and then I re-released it and apologized to my audience because I totally goofed. I should have just totally listened to, It's
a lot of pressure to be able to make that call as a podcast host, but I think every host should feel empowered to make those decisions. If you don't want it to go out with your name on it like that, then it's okay to hold the bar as high as you need to make sure to protect the integrity of your listenership.
Yeah, absolutely.
As things are coming back to me, I do remember that you did pay for your sins, Sonny, because what you did was you went back and asked him all the questions, and then he answered them, and then she went back in and took his old answers out and put his new answers in, and that had to take forever.
That's a tedious process.
It was pretty tedious, and I don't like doing that because then sometimes the answers sound a little canned because you're like, okay, the person before you just said this, now say this.
Right.
It's like kind of going back to scripting, what we talked about earlier. But sometimes, I really wanted to get that done and do it right. So, but if I would have just stopped from the beginning and been like, guys, I know we've been trying to do this, but this is just not working out.
Not okay.
Schedule, like that would have worked too,
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So I just want to review everything with you guys. So we went through our 7 deadly sins here, but I want to recap really quickly before we wrap things up. So in the beginning, we talked about using the wrong equipment or using it incorrectly. We talked about microphones and using mic stands, pop filters, windscreens, all that good stuff. Recording in a bad location. We know that recording in a closet can work wonders. You don't have to have the most fancy studio. I think John talked about pizza boxes and stacking that a little bit so you have the best sound quality as possible, avoiding echoey rooms, anything carpeted, things like that. Slow internet speed, so you know what speeds now to look for. Again, the one website that we told you about was speedtest.net. Always a good idea to test your speed, and I think it's good to test it roughly at about the time of day that you're planning to record, because sometimes the speed levels could be a little bit different. So make sure that you know what your levels are. Send that link over to your guests so they can test as well. And wacky volume levels. So, being able to, make sure that you're the proper distance from the mic and, what to do. We talked about Ecamm now has that adjustment that they've made so that you can adjust your guest volume level, or at least get them on the same par as you. I think from an editing standpoint, if your volume is about the same as your guest, that's probably going to be easier to adjust in the post process. Common speaking mistakes, right? So agreeing with your guests too much, the ums and the ahs, using filler words. We talked about scripting and how that could help, but perhaps bullet points might be something that just helps with flow a little bit. So you know where to go, but it's not so rigid and it doesn't sound so canned. And we talked about practicing. We're going to get you that checklist. So I'll get that from Christy and I'll post it where we post this video. So if you guys want that checklist of things to go through from a production standpoint, but then also reviewing your scripts, if you have them, sending content to your guests in advance, if that's kind of what you do with your show, that can help. Running through everything is also a good idea as well. And then the last deadly sin is knowing when you really should just stop recording. Don't continue to record when you just need to press that stop button and reschedule. So doing all of, at least kind of, trying to make all of this work and trying to avoid those deadly sins will definitely help you when it comes to podcast recording and really creating the best show possible, which is what we're all trying to do. So guys, thank you so much for being part of our show today. I know we went a little bit over on time, but this was really good information for our members, for all the podcasters out there. And thanks for being here. And we'll see you again sometime soon.
Thanks, Sonny.
All right.
Thanks for having
everyone.
us.
All right. Bye, guys.